Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Fraudsters are targeting your accounts payable department. Are you prepared? I'm Mark Brousseau. I'm one of your co-presenters for today's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is a big concern for AP leaders, and that is payment fraud. It's not theoretical anymore. According to the Association for Financial Professionals, more than 65% of all organizations have experienced attempted or actual payment fraud within the past year. And what's changed is not just the volume of fraud schemes, it's the sophistication of them too. Fraudsters are now impersonating vendors convincingly, exploiting email systems, and even leveraging stolen data from breaches to make requests look legitimate. Many AP departments believe that they're protected because they have some approval workflows in place or even segregation of duties. But the reality is that many cases fraudsters are exploiting those gaps in our systems. During today's webinar, we're going to show you how to mitigate your risks. I have just a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. To ensure call quality, everyone's voice lines have been muted today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout today's webinar. To do so, simply use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit your questions to me. We'll answer your questions at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, an on-demand recording of today's webinar will be made available to all of you within the next few business days. We encourage you to share it with your peers and your coworkers. I'm pleased today to be joined by Phil Binkow, the CEO of VendorInfo. Phil has literally spent decades helping organizations strengthen supplier onboarding, compliance, and bank account verification processes. Later in today's webinar, Phil's going to be along to walk us through a live demonstration of one solution for automated bank account verification so you can see how this type of technology works in practice. So here's what we're going to cover during today's webinar. We'll start with the latest fraud schemes targeting AP teams. Then we'll look at why traditional bank account verification methods create risk, often unintentionally. Next, we'll discuss best practices that you can implement immediately in your department. We'll also cover what to look for when evaluating verification solutions. And then, as I said, Phil will be along to demonstrate how automated bank account verification can strengthen your controls. We'll also close with some Q&A. Hopefully at the end of today's webinar, you'll have both some strategic insights as well as some practical next steps to help mitigate your organization's risk of fraud. There's no question that payment fraud risk is rising. Yeah, it's not just you. And it's not slowing down anytime soon. In many cases, cyber criminals are operating like businesses. Some of them are even funded by rogue nations. These fraudsters are testing, they're refining, they're constantly scaling their attacks, and they're sharing their tactics on the dark web, using forums to trade schemes that have been successful. And too often they're using automation, things like AI, to create convincing messages. Make it clear, what used to be poorly written phishing emails are now pretty flawless communications that in many cases reference real invoices and real contacts and even real supplier relationships. And at the same time, organizations are accelerating their digital payments and remote work. And what that means is that, as law enforcement agencies would say, we're expanding our attack surface. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be paying more suppliers electronically. Quite the contrary. But what it is saying is we need to make sure that as we migrate to electronic payments, we have methods for ensuring that they're done securely. The takeaway to all of this is pretty clear. Strengthening bank account verification is foundational to protecting our payments, particularly in today's high risk environment. And if it feels like your risks are higher these days, you certainly aren't imagining things. There are several factors that are converging to increase fraud risk. The first is our dependence on email. Email remains the number one entry point for business email compromise, the fastest growing form of electronic payments fraud. Second, cyber criminal tactics are constantly evolving. Today's cyber criminals don't just blast emails randomly anymore. They research your organization and they're targeting individuals using things like social engineering to try and trick us into giving them access or giving them information. Third, data breaches are providing a treasure trove of information to fraudsters. In many cases, fraudsters know your vendors' names, the contacts at vendor organizations in your organization, and even your payment cycles. In many cases, all this information is gleaned from emails that have been hacked, maybe yours or a coworkers or even a supplier's. Fourth, weak security measures and outdated processes are creating some pretty easy entry points for hackers. And if globalization is adding complexity to this whole mix. Cross border payments are making verification more challenging. And it's not uncommon for even small companies to do business with international suppliers. So globalization is something we've all got to prepare for. And finally, many AP staff simply haven't been trained to recognize today's fraud tactics. The problem is many of us train our staff once a year or maybe even just when they've been onboarded. And today's fraud schemes are constantly evolving. As we plug one hole, fraudsters are creating or finding another one. Put it all together, and the clear message here is that fraud risk isn't caused by any one weakness. It's typically the combination of several weaknesses. And unfortunately, AP teams are being targeted through several common schemes. The most common, of course, is phishing emails. Phishing emails attempt to trick employees into revealing credentials. In many cases, these emails appear to come from our ERP provider or our bank or even our suppliers. We're also seeing more cases of business email compromise or BEC. This involves criminals impersonating our senior executives or vendors to get us to redirect payments. We need to urgently change this bank account detail or our supply chain is going to come grinding to a halt. In the United States each year, more money is lost to BEC schemes than to bank robberies. I know bank robberies sound far more interesting, but this is the statistics I have to work with. We're also seeing cases of account takeover, those instances where fraudsters gain access to legitimate email accounts and then send authentic looking requests. We also have invoice fraud involving fake invoices designed to blend in with normal vendor activity. Many cases, the fraudsters will lie in wait until it's time for a supplier to send an invoice, and they insert themselves with an invoice where the remittance details or payment details have been changed. And finally, yep, check tampering still exists. In fact, check fraud is up 18% in the past year. But the good news is that electronic payment redirection is a threat that is where fraudsters are really redirecting their attention and one that we can attack. What's important here is this. These schemes are designed to look routine. In just about all the cases, they rely on things like urgency and familiarity and trust. Fraudsters don't need to hack into our systems. They just need to trick their ways in. And one way that they do that is phony bank account change requests. You've all received them, but here's how the typical bank account change request unfolds. It begins inevitably with reconnaissance. Fraudsters study your vendors and, in many cases, your payment patterns. They're often doing this by hacking into somebody's email. Next comes social engineering. They're building credibility through things like spoofed domains or compromised accounts. You've probably received those emails where, if you look very carefully, you notice that one character has been changed. An L has been swapped for an I. At the end of the day, when we're busy, we're tired, maybe we're new to the job, we don't look, that could get us fooled. And next comes the phishing or the spoofed email that's sent requesting an urgent baking update. It's almost always got a sense of urgency to it. Fraudsters know that AP departments are under pressure. We're busy and we're people pleasers. Uh, that fraudulent change request is submitted, and if verification controls are weak, well, the next payment goes to the fraudster. And by the time the real supplier calls saying, "Hey, where's my payment?" those funds are long gone, often whisked away in, into foreign bank accounts. Today, only about 20% of all funds associated with BEC attacks are ever recovered. Unfortunately, this whole scenario from phony bank account change requests is one of the fastest growing fraud schemes targeting accounts payable. And we know that the cost of all this payment fraud goes far beyond stolen funds. We're right to focus on the financial losses. In many cases, they're significant and unrecoverable. But we see some collateral fallout from payment fraud as well. Supplier relationships inevitably suffer when vendors don't receive payments. Vendors might wonder whether you're a company they should really doing business with. Legal and regulatory exposure may arise if controls are deemed inadequate. You might have some reputational damage that could impact your trust with not just your suppliers, but maybe your customers and your board members too. Maybe senior executives just start wondering whether you're the right people to be leading the AP or finance department. And left unchecked, well, or if the fraud is big enough, you might see cases where your stock value or market confidence is affected. It Put it all together, and fraud isn't just an AP issue, it's an enterprise risk. And CFOs I talk to know it. It's keeping them up at night. So, what do we do about this? Well, the first thing we need to do is take a look at the way it is that we go about verifying bank account details. And the reality for many of you is that traditional AP department processes weren't designed for today's threat environment. Most of us are using manual or semi-automated verification. And we know that manual verification is really time consuming. And we know that the more time we give a fraudster, the more likely they are to be able to get away with something. We also know that the more time an activity takes, the more likely it is that a busy person will cut a corner, take a shortcut. We also know that human error is prone to error, especially when we're under pressure, or maybe we're new to the job, and many AP departments have had turnover in the past several years. We also know it's hard to scale manual or semi-automated processes, and processes that might work at lower volumes often don't work when volumes are higher. And most critically, manual and semi-automated methods lack real-time validation. They also lack independent validation. Most of us are relying on judgment calls. When teams rely on emails and phone calls and spreadsheets to verify bank changes, it inevitably introduces risk and delay. And that's why fraudsters thrive in these manual environments. And if you're doing business internationally, well, now things become even more tricky. Verification becomes more complex when we have international suppliers. Different countries have different banking formats, maybe different routing systems, different verification standards. Real time verification tools such as databases might not be available in every country, and manual verification across languages and time zones, well, that introduces those delays and errors that I was talking about, giving fraudsters room to operate. As organizations expand globally, do more business globally, well, now things get even more complex and fraud risk increases right along with it. So, what can we do about all this? Well, there are some essential strategies for protecting your payments. The key thing is that it requires what I'd call a layered approach. The first step, starts with people. You want to train your staff to recognize fraud indicators and those escalation procedures. You want to create a culture of fraud mitigation where staff knows that it's okay to say, "Oh, hold on a second here," or to even say no to someone who might have a C ahead of their title. You also want to implement strong access controls and approval protocols. You want to have things like multi factor authentication. I know it can be a hassle to have to reach for your phone to be able to verify the authenticity. But even in cases where credentials have been stolen, MFA can be a good tool. You also want to make sure that solutions have things like user access permissions and segregation of duties and systematic workflows, audit logging, data encryption. All of that together helps mitigate risk. You also want to develop a fraud response plan. Now, I know that might surprise you. Well, hold on, Mark. Aren't you trying to help us stop fraud? Well, yes, but the reality is that we don't want to acknowledge internal fraud, which is a case where we might not always be able to stop it. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're prepared for the worst so we can mitigate the financial losses. What will happen if fraud is uncovered? Who will be notified? What procedures will be followed? Do we need to talk to the C suite? Do we need to notify regulatory authorities? And that brings us to our fifth step, and that you want to regularly review and update your security policies. Fraud schemes are constantly evolving. We want to make sure that our policies are too. Most of us have them in a paper or virtual book that's somewhere tucked away that folks can't always access. We want to make sure that we're constantly reviewing those to make sure they're up to date and letting everyone know. Make them a part of our regular huddles in our AP department, or have periodic lunch and learns with our team, whether it's in person or virtual, and even do full blown training at regular intervals to make sure everybody can take a deeper dive into fraud prevention. You see, fraud prevention isn't a one time project, it's an ongoing discipline. And one of the most powerful things you can do as part of that discipline is to automate the verification of bank account change requests. It really transforms verification from a manual or semi automated task into a controlled process. With an automated solution, suppliers register and submit information through a secure portal. In some cases, you could put that information in for them if you want. Information, though, is going to be validated automatically in a controlled manner. Approval workflows will ensure that anything that doesn't look quite right gets the appropriate oversight. It's almost like a stoplight. Green means, yep, this all looks good. Yellow means, there might be something to take a little look at here. Red means, whoa, something doesn't look right here. And all of this data can be integrated directly with your ERP or payment systems, and that's key. So that means it's not a set it and forget it thing where you do it once when a supplier is onboarded. Every payment, every time can be verified using this type of technology. All of this together reduces manual handling, it improves accuracy, it creates a defensible audit trail. This is great not just for you and your senior management, but if you are making ACH payments, well, NACHA expects you to do it this way too. Starting in March and then fully rolled out in June, NACHA has some new rules for organizations that initiate ACH payments where they're saying, well, you got to do exactly all of this. And in a manual environment, all of this is going to be really hard. So automation doesn't just improve efficiency, it really strengthens your control. And would argue that it does it in three important ways. First, real time verification ensures that banking details are validated every time before a payment is made. No ifs, ands, or buts. Second, consistency eliminates that process variability that we often have in a manual environment. And that allows you to have standardization and create complete audit trails. And third, integration with whatever ERP or legacy systems you're using ensures that every single payment is going to be verified automatically, not selectively. And if you want to set thresholds, take a closer look at certain transactions for certain circumstances, well, that's fine. But the key thing is every single payment is going to be validated because fraud prevention works best when it's embedded into your workflows rather than embedded into someone's memory. For global suppliers, this is also really powerful technology. Buyers send secure invitations, suppliers enter their banking details through a portal, ownership verification is confirmed, and all of this removes the reliance on emails and PDFs and manual validation for those international transactions. So whether you're paying someone in Canada or say the United Kingdom, the solution has methods for verifying the authenticity of those bank accounts, whether they're a member of a database or not. So you might be saying, well, this sounds really interesting. I want to know more. How do I pick the right solution? Well, when evaluating solutions, there's a couple of key capabilities that I want you to look for. The first is real-time verification. You want to make sure that you close the gaps in which fraudsters can operate. The second is make sure a solution has multi-factor authentication. That strengthens security, even in cases where someone's credentials have been stolen. Next, you want to make sure this solution continuously monitors transactions to help detect changes and anomalies that might require a closer look. You also want to make sure that the solution is scalable to ensure that it can grow with your organization. And finally, you want to make sure that whatever bank account verification solution you look at supports both domestic and international accounts all on one platform. The right solution should strengthen security while simplifying your operations. So let's bring it all together. Traditional processes for verifying bank account changes, they're probably leaving your AP department vulnerable to fraud. And the problem is that payment fraud and cyber attacks are increasing in sophistication, and fraudsters are using technologies like AI that are making it harder and harder to detect which transactions are legit and which ones are phony. The good news here is that best practices combined with automation can significantly mitigate your risk. And when you automate your verification processes, that helps your organization move from being reactive to proactive. But don't take my word for it. Phil is now going to show us a live demonstration of one solution, VendorInfo's solution, for automatically verifying bank account change requests. Phil? I think you're on mute, Phil.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, everyone. Uh, Appreciate you all being here today, and I hope you're having a good day. And this webinar has been providing some helpful information. Uh, what you're seeing on the screen is just a little form that can be filled out by someone on your staff, or you can also have this vendor facing, and the vendor can fill out their banking information form online. And once that information is filled out, then it automatically gets verified. And I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. There's a 9-point automated bank account ownership validation routine. And the 9 points are the routing number and the account number. So you can see that the account is, in fact, an opened account. It's a real account. But more so, you can also see a comparison with what the bank has on file for that particular supplier's bank account. So it checks the company name against what the bank has on file, the address, street address, the city, the state, the zip code, and the taxpayer ID. And it can be an EIN for an independent contractor. For example, it can also be a social security number. And then in addition, it also shows a picture and a map of the facility itself. This happens to be us. This happens to be our building. And if everything matches, it's all green. The system uses green, yellow, and red indicators to determine whether something is good to go, or there might be a problem, or there might be a big problem. I'll give you an example of that right now. Uh, in this particular case, this is yellow on the bank icon here. This is your dashboard or your control center. And what this is showing is that it is in fact a real bank account and it's open, but the address doesn't match at all. And the mismatches get parceled out into warnings uh, and alerts. Alerts are partial matches. They're close, but they're not exact. And warnings mean that it's not a match at all. So what you're able to do with the system is go back and tell the vendor. You can send them a little note and say, "Hey, this didn't really match," uh, and please resubmit your information. If you were doing this online, you can have the vendor fill this information out. Uh, Let me come over here. You can have the vendor fill the information out, and validation can happen for both U.S. accounts and non-U.S. accounts, depending on if U.S. is selected, it asks for the banking information that's required to validate a U.S. account. If non-U.S. is selected, then it asks for the information, and they're able to put their country in, and it'll ask for the specific information required for that country. And that information will go out regardless of location, regardless of country. And if it's in a database, uh, which are most of the validations, but not all, then that information will come back to you immediately, which is what we saw over here. And if it's not in a database, it could take a little bit longer because it's a little more involved to validate that bank account. In addition to that, you can also be validating taxpayer IDs and whether the entity is on a sanctions list. I'll give you an example of what that looks like. This happens to be us. Taxpayer IDs are validated against the IRS. Sanctions lists are validated against the sanctioning companies lists, such as uh, OFAC in the US, EU lists, uh, UK, UN, and so on. And there are also other watch lists such as cybercrime, money laundering crime, white collar crime. and those are all validated. Those are all validated for you as well. And you're able to use all of this. It's a modular system, so you can use all of this either as a back office, uh, or you can connect it with another data source through APIs, or you can have it as a full-fledged vendor onboarding system where the vendors actually come and they fill out all the information that you require and provide all the documentation that you need, and the validations happen really right on the fly. Uh, and Mark, I know that's kind of a high level overview. We're running a little bit close to the time limit. Perhaps we can open up the queue for questions and see if there's anything that we can answer for some folks.
I think that sounds like a great idea. If you haven't already submitted your question for Phil, or if you've thought of another question for Phil, go ahead, use the questions tool on your screen to submit your question to me. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Lauren wants to know more about what's involved in deploying this solution in the typical AP department.
Sure, great question, Lauren. So it really depends on the modules that you want. If you were looking just to do back office bank account verification, or maybe even a simplified version of vendor facing, you can really get that done. It can be implemented within a few weeks. Uh, in some cases, for very simple implementations, it can happen in a week of when you say go. More complicated implementations, it could take 6 to 8 weeks. It really depends on the scope of work of our customer and what their particular requirements are.
Chris wants to know whether the solution can validate credit union accounts.
It can validate the accounts for any financial institution. Yes, yes, it's a great question, and it's one that's asked a lot. But it can validate the accounts for any financial institution anywhere in the world.
Sharon wants to know roughly how many of your requests are first time validated.
Uh, that's a really good question. And all of the requests do, in fact, get validated. Uh, Sometimes there is no database of bank account information in the world that includes 100% of all of the accounts in its particular country. So what that means is that for bank accounts that can be validated through a database are validated instantly. But the ones that are not in a database, either because the country doesn't have a database or because uh, that particular account is not a part of the database, then those go through a different methodology, and they are validated. So it's all a continuous flow, and it's 100% validation.
Tyler wants to know whether you can validate Canadian bank accounts.
We can. We do validate Canadian bank accounts every day.
Troy wants to know how long does it take to get a response back from the system?
So, yeah, great question, Troy. If the account is in a database, the response is instantaneous. If it's not in a database, then it can take anywhere from a day or two up to perhaps a week. And we've seen it take a little bit longer if the account is not in a database because it's just uh, a little bit more work has to be done in order to validate that account. But I'd say probably 85%, 90% are happening instantaneously. The rest take a little longer.
Kimberly wants to know, are there best practices for manual verification until this solution can be implemented?
Uh, you can call, do not email. As Mark mentioned, the The bad actors they're in the email systems, and that's one of the big sources of problems right now. So you certainly don't want to email. Uh, Calling is a practice. I don't know if it's a best practice anymore. And the reason I say that is because we're hearing that uh, the fraudsters are cloning voices from people who are supposed to be trusted. It's just amazing the patience and the depth uh, that the perpetrators have in order to really tap into the payment stream.
Michael wants to know whether the solution has capabilities for TIN matching and sanction screening.
It does, Michael. There is this, in fact, on this. Let me share my screen with you right now. I'll share this and then go back to the contact information. So what you're able to do is see tins that match. If there was a tin that didn't match, for example, here, in this particular case, it shows up in red. You're able to reach back out to the supplier and and have them provide the correct information. Stop sharing. Sorry, Mark. I think when I stopped sharing, I took off the contact information.
Well, we've got to fix that. One of our attendees wants to know any tips for selling bank account automation to senior management. We're sold, but our senior management is skeptical of spending money on automation right now.
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's one that we hear a lot. So we have a little booklet, an ebook that's called the CFO's Guide to Vendor Data Risk, and the CFO's Guide to Vendor Data Risk. And if you would like a copy of that, just shoot me an email. My email address is up there. Give me a call, and we'll get it right out to you. It's really helpful.
And that will be our final word. Phil, thanks so much for an excellent demonstration and for sharing your insights with us today. And thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. On behalf of Vendor Info and Phil, this is Mark Brousseau. Thank you all for joining us. Hope to speak with you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone.